ethnic studies changes lives. It gives students a purpose. I know it saved my life. It gave me direction. It increases test scores. It increases the number of students of color who enter the university. But most important, it improves the cross-cultural relationships of all our students.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, to another episode of All the Above, the show that gives you an unstandardized take on education. I'm Jeffrey Garrett, one of your co-hosts, and I've been a middle and high school principal and a high school social studies teacher. And as always, I'm joined by...
What up, family? It's Manuel, your favorite teacher's favorite teacher. I'm a high school history teacher here in the Los Angeles area. And this here, of course, is All of the Above, your home for news and analysis of all matters pertaining to our world of education. For those of you that might be joining us for the very first time, we definitely hope you enjoy what you see if you're watching on YouTube or the Spotify app, or what you hear if you are listening on the go. Here we like to center marginalized perspectives and discuss issues in education through a critical lens and also a humanizing lens as we think about our young people and building a better future for them. Now, Jeff, it's been a minute since we had a full episode. We have, super dope guests and dope headlines and all that good stuff on deck. And it's also Memorial Weekend when this episode is dropping, which for a lot of folks marks the beginning of summer. Now, Jeff, I know you are Mr. Super Duper Principal Leader Man, and summer doesn't mean the same to you as it does to those of us classroom teachers. But I do wonder, back when you were a classroom teacher who had summers off, what was your favorite thing to do during the summer?
Wow, that is fascinating.
Hey, we starting with deep questions, man.
Yeah, we do.
Heavy.
I was not prepared for this, folks. First of all, absolutely, summer is not for me what it used to be. It's actually one of the busiest times of year, and I haven't had a teacher summer break in many years, let's say, sadly. So when I was a teacher, the best thing about the summer, I would say, Manuel. So this was in New York City. And on one level, I would say the best thing about the summer is my first 2 years of teaching was in a school where originally I did not have a working air conditioning. And my classroom faced south. This was at a historic school building in East Harlem. The classroom faced south, and it had windows that were, I'm not exaggerating, like 10 or 11 feet tall, like gigantic windows. It's so tall that there was a top set of curtains and a bottom set of shades to cover the windows. But teaching in that room in September was unpleasant, and teaching in that room in June, where in New York the summer does not begin until like June 22nd or something like that, was also not pleasant at all. So one of the most pleasant things was just being able to be somewhere where there was air conditioning. Okay, but all seriousness aside, I would say, Manuel, the great thing about summer was the ability to do things you wanted to do on a weekday, and that's the best. Like, I can the expansion of the weekend activities to be any day of the week activities is just liberating in a way that I most certainly miss. But how about you?
I mean, man, you said it right there. Summer break weekdays are just elite, and like Sunday nights, because like you're actually carefree. You can stay up late. You don't have to worry about the lessons and the grading and all that stuff. That freedom, I guess that the freedom will be my favorite part. But yeah, honestly, just being able to wake up and, move at my own pace. That's always my favorite part of summer, just moving at my own pace, not trying to get somewhere at a certain time before the bell rings and do this and do that and whatever. But also, travel and things, whatever, all that too. But Jeff, if you can't tell, I'm looking forward to summer. And I know my classroom teachers out there are with me when I say that. So, just remember, Jeff, you get the big bucks because you're the administrator. So that's, one of the trade-offs is not having that summer break. So shout out to all of you administrators out there who get like a week or two and then it's back at it. And shout out to you teachers who have to work in the summer, because the reality is, of course, we're not compensated what we should be as classroom teachers. And a lot of y'all got to work because the reality is the reality. So shout out to you too. So yeah. All right, Jeff. Yep. full episode, and I suspect we might have quite a few people tuning in for the very first time as a result of the topic that we're going to be discussing during our seminar portion today. So why don't you go ahead and let us know, Jeff, what's on the agenda for today's episode?
Yes, sir. Well, Manuel, it's fair to say I am just deeply excited for today's conversation. It is a topic that is very close to my heart as an educator, my soul as an educator. Even though I didn't technically teach this subject, I think I was aspiring to teach this subject as an educator in an era before it was like talked about as a thing in the K-12 system. And that is the topic of ethnic studies, man. Well, we're going to talk about what's happening with ethnic studies here in the state of California, here in the city of Los Angeles, where the state is preparing to institute its mandate for ethnic studies to be a required component of the curriculum for high school graduates starting in 2025. In Los Angeles Unified, where that mandate has rolled out ahead of the state mandate. And there also are higher ed implications for this as well, where the UC and CSU and community college systems are also instituting their own versions of this requirement. So lots happening. And of course, this is all in the midst of the national chaos and right-wing hysteria around CRT, so-called CRT, and the pushback against anything that even approaches a truthful teaching of history or discussion of American society. So we're going to dig deep into all that today, Manuel, excuse me. What's your name again? Manuel.
Hello, Jeffrey.
How many years has it been? We're going to dig into all that today, Manuel, if I can get my letters straight here, with two incredible guests. We have Dr. Theresa Montaño, who's a professor at Cal State University Northridge. Shout out to CSUN. And we also have, for a portion of the discussion, Lupe Cardona, who is a graduate student who works at Cal State Northridge with Dr. Montaño. Unfortunately, folks, we had some technical glitches during the recording, so you'll see that Lupe is with us for a portion of the discussion. There's a little bit of some recording issues there. We got some brilliant snippets from her, so we wanted to leave them in so you could hear them, but for most of the discussion, it'll be just Dr. Montaño. So that's what's coming up, folks. It's going to be fantastic. Stick around because you definitely don't want to miss it.
Sounds dope. Sounds dope. And folks, we'll drop some links under this episode. Lupe has a wonderful YouTube channel out there with great resources for those who want to learn more about ethnic studies. And so we'll definitely, link her since, we didn't get the full visit from Lupe for the seminar, but a bunch of other resources too, because we know some folks who are watching or listening might be searching for those resources because you are one of the districts or one of the teachers who is looking at the deadlines approaching and being the one that has to put this together for your district where maybe ethnic studies didn't exist before. So definitely check out those links down below and give that thumbs up while you're at it. All right. But up first, though, we have our Do Now. We're going to take a look at some news and headlines around the world of education. And that's coming up next. Stay tuned. All right, folks, now it's time for today's Do Now. Jeff, how are we going to do that Do Now today?
Well, Manuel, today, your favorite type of Do Now, where we bring shame and finger pointing at all the people who have failed, is a report card. We're going to hand out some grades.
Hey, man, perfect time to hand out some grades. Summer break is approaching for a lot of young ones. Let's ruin some young people's summer breaks with some bad report card reporting and all that. Let's do it. All right, Jeff, the first grade for today's Do Now. It's actually a C, followed by R, followed by M. CRM. Jeff, are you familiar with CRM?
I'm going to give you a super nerdy answer, Manuel, that reveals how much of a YouTube geek I am and proud of it. So I have, over the course of the pandemic, taken to following a YouTube channel with this airline pilot who tells all these interesting stories about accidents in the history of the airline industry and like how the industry fixed them and responded to them and made planes more safer today. So I've learned all this cool stuff about aviation, one of which is CRM, which I believe stands for Cockpit Resource Management, which is how the pilot and the first officer work together to handle emergency situations and safely navigate to the ground so that everyone survives. Final answer.
Wow, Jeff. That is a phenomenal answer. It's certainly wrong. It's definitely incorrect. But it's quite phenomenal. Yeah, my wife, she watches air disasters, a show about air disasters. So she might be into some of those same videos you're into, Jeff.
Yeah.
But again, you're wrong. The good news is that there is a free online community college here in California where you could get a certificate in CRM. And by the time you earn that, you definitely know what CRM stands for. In this case, it is Customer Relationship Management, which is one of 3 disciplines offered through this online college that is the focus of our story today, Jeff. All right, so we got this story by way of Cal Matters, thanks to some reporting by Mikhail. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name. I should have did some Googles, but I'll spell it for
I'm going to give it a shot, man. I'm going to go with...
Oh, go for it.
Zinstein.
You know what? I'll take it. Why not? Z-I-N.
We tried.
S-H-T-E-Y-N. All right, for sure. So shout out to Mikhail for Cal Matters. And this story reports about Calbright Community College, which is California's only fully online community college. And this college is no longer struggling for students like it had been in previous years. And it's no longer the state's tiniest community college. Now, bucking the trend of 40 other California campuses that continue to shed students and struggle to rebound from an enrollment collapse, which we've discussed on the show previously, Calbright now serves 2,300 students, which is up by about 1,000 students since the last year, and its enrollment is growing by about 8% per month. Now, the college was created in 2018 to help workers acquire skills for in-demand jobs and has faced criticism for low enrollment numbers and high administrative costs. California Governor Gavin Newsom's proposed budget includes $100 million to expand Calbright's programs and services, and the college plans to use the funds to create new programs and hire additional staff. Supporters argue that Calbright provides a valuable resource for working adults who can't attend traditional community colleges. But critics argue that the college duplicates existing programs and wastes taxpayer money. Now, the college's future remains uncertain as lawmakers debate the budget and the overall effectiveness of online education. Jeff, we have been at this show for a very long time, and I do remember, I think it was season 1 or season 2 of this show, one of our Do Now stories was about the formation of Calbright Community College and the naming of its first president. And here we are all these years later. There have been several attempts to shut down the college for a litany of reasons, and here the college appears to be rebounding and growing strong and bucking the trend of a recent story that we discussed where so many community colleges across the whole nation are struggling for enrollment. So, Jeff, what are your thoughts about this apparent, rebound of Calbright Community College?
I have 2 thoughts, Manuel. The first is that I am happy that Calbright is finding greater success. It sounds like they're in greater demand and enrollment is growing. I think that's probably a good thing for the students who are there and for them as an institution. My second set of thoughts is all of us know that online learning is not that great. And so I still maintain some of the reservations that I had in the beginning and that I think I will always have about the quality of the learning experience that comes with an online learning experience, right? So let me back up here for a sec. On the one hand, Manuel, this is not at all a typical community college in California, and I would say probably relative to most community colleges across the country. It is like a public-private partnership. It's subsidized with like industry funding. In theory, it's supposed to help mid-career, career changer adults shift, right? Get additional certification and shift. Obviously, if that is done well, it can have real transformative impact on the economic fortunes of families across the state of California. The fact that it is online means, especially if you live in a rural area, which are often the people who are furthest away from the physical plant infrastructure of colleges and universities, that there is, at least in theory, if you have good internet access in your rural area, no longer a barrier to your enrollment and access to the curriculum. So there are all kinds of reasons to want this to work well. And I hope it does. And so to the extent that this is good news on that front and evidence that, they had some bumps in the beginning, but they're starting to figure it out now and it's working. Hey, man, great. I haven't heard about, this being sort of suspect data or anything like that. So, hey, that's great. And I want to say there are just questions I still grapple with around what's the extent to which we can trust that quality learning is taking place in an online context. Obviously, grown adults, working in a college setting is a different context than what we experienced during the pandemic, which was, of course, hot trash, but in terms of online learning, But, I think there's legitimate questions still to be asked there. And so I'm cool. And there's a little asterisk here that we need to think about because online learning isn't great. And especially if you are a learner whose ability to engage is compromised in any way, lots of competing family obligations, having to be a full-time worker at the same time as I'm a student, potentially already being lower on the income scale. And so, having just the economic struggles of life to grapple with. So, I think with all that, there's reasons we should be asking questions about, is Calbright actually delivering on the promise? And to the extent the answer is yes, dope, good for them, good for the people who are benefiting. That's my take, Manuel. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, this is just such an interesting institution. It's just so interesting. So this is a California community college, but it's not like the others at all. Aside from the fact that it's online, aside from the fact that it's tuition free, and thanks to the public-private partnerships that you mentioned, students who need help get a Chromebook or a device and hotspots and things like that, similar to what my students get at the high school level. It doesn't give degrees. You're not at this college to earn an AA. You're at this college to receive a certificate, and they're very specific about 3 actual programs that are designed to get you directly into the workplace. The CRM certificate, which we mentioned, the customer relationship manager, which is, deals, from my understanding, has something to do with databases and managing what with the information that companies have about their customers and stuff like that. That's as far as I get. I didn't take the course, people. It is free, but I didn't take it. It also has a certificate in IT support and a certificate in cybersecurity. So 3 very specific fields. And you're not getting a degree. You're also not working on the semester or quarter schedule. It's self-paced. They're referring to it as competency-based model. So you progress at your own pace through these lessons, working your way towards completion and eventually towards these certificates. So that's for sure designed for working folks who have multiple responsibility or juggling multiple responsibilities and can't do the structure of our traditional school days. I love that as a option for folks who need it, because let's be real, the typical structures of our education system that we are operating within were created so long ago, they do not really meet the reality of so many people's lives. And this sounds like an offering that you would think was a product of the pandemic, based on all that happened during the pandemic and all that we learned. But this school started before the pandemic, so this was not because of it. But I think the pandemic has shed light on the need for opportunities like this for those students who just can't do the brick and mortar that used to be the expectation back in the day. So all that is very fascinating to me. 2,300 students. If it's growing, that's fantastic. The folks profiled in this piece, or the folks who spoke in this piece, some spoke to how if it wasn't self-paced and if it wasn't, what it is, then they just wouldn't be in school at all. And then there's some other folks who said it's a little bit too flexible, they could use a little more accountability because, sometimes it helps to have rigid deadlines to get you to actually do the stuff in timely fashion. So, I don't know. I didn't realize it was on the brink of being shut down because we talked about it opening and we kind of didn't talk about it since then. So I'm happy to hear that it's rebounded. It sounds like the folks who need this, are benefiting from it. So why not? We as many different options, as many different models as possible. We're a big, diverse state and we have the money. So let's make it happen.
Yep. Makes sense, man. Makes sense.
Yeah. All right, Jeff. We got another grade. No flight disasters on this one, man. Let's get a real grade here. All right. This is a serious production here. Serious show here. Let's get a grade, Jeff. What we got?
We have a very important grade for this next story, Manuel, because as people in California know, in order to be college and university eligible here, 4-year college and university eligible, you need to get this grade or better in all your core content classes, that, Manuel, being a C.
Yeah. C, that's where it's at, man. I'm not going to lie. As soon as I look at student transcripts, when I'm having students and I'm just checking in with them and I'm going through their transcripts, I'm immediately looking for D's, because if there's a D there, automatically you got to retake that class if you're trying to go straight to a Cal State or a UC. Like, we got to make it happen. So C's, not the best, but you are correct. In the context of California, if it's a course that's required for admission, yeah, you better have a C or higher. So, hey, we got a C or higher. We're in there, Jeff. We in there.
Yes. We are officially minimally qualified and almost certain to get rejected.
For sure.
with our C in the highly competitive UC and CSU systems. Of course, in this context, Manuel, C is not referring to that type of C, but referring to a colonizer. So, let's talk about some people right now, Manuel.
All right.
Let's talk about some people. Here we go, folks. This C is inspired by a story in NPR by Scott Newman, and the hand over mouth war whoop, the tomahawk chop, and the twirling around in a circle like a war dance. These are just some of the racist actions sports fans engage in particular at events where one or more teams uses a Native American mascot. While public backlash against Native American stereotypes has pushed professional teams to change their names, there remain more than 1,200 high schools across the United States. That's right, 1,200 that continue to use Native American themed mascots and logos. Quote, the mascot imagery just continues to perpetuate and reinforce colonial white supremacist ideas and stands as a barrier for new opportunities for dialogue and education, end quote, says Michael Johnson, Chief Strategy Officer of Illuminative, a national Native woman-led racial and social justice organization based in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Some states have moved to ban such imagery outright, calling it offensive and out of touch. However, efforts to do so have also met intense resistance by supporters who say the team names are central to the traditions and identity of their communities. Tyler Jimenez, an assistant professor of psychology at the University of Washington, was the lead author on a study indicating that instead of increasing understanding and compassion with Native Americans, among some individuals, mascot bans actually had the exact opposite result. The study was conducted in the year following the removal of the University of Illinois' Chief Illiniwek and the Cleveland baseball team's Chief Wahoo, and looked specifically at people who said they believe that racism is, quote, not really a big problem in U.S. society, according to Jimenez. Quote, on one interpretation, is that if someone really thinks that racism is not a problem, then it's kind of hard to make sense of this type of decision, he said. It's a threat to their belief system, and they're reacting prejudicially as a result of that, end quote. So, Manuel, I said at the top, we're going to talk about some people in this segment. Please help me talk about some people, please.
It's fun. It's interesting that the grade is a C for colonizer. This reminds me of some of my students, some of my ethnic studies students. They had a swim meet in Orange County, and the high school that they went to for the swim meet, their mascot was the colonists, and they're like Rustin, they're the colonists, because we were learning about settler colonialism and colonizers and all that, and it's absolute trash. I mean, I don't understand. No, I definitely understand, because this is America and we know how things go here. But like, why are folks clinging on to high school mascots this like racistly. I mean, there's so many options out there for a mascot, for a high school mascot. There's like millions of options. Why do folks feel so entitled? And this is about entitlement. This is about folks feeling entitled to the dignity and the power of an entire community, and entitled to feeling like they know more about this than Native American folks know about it. This article mentioned polling amongst Native American folks being around 70 to 73% of folks who are against any references to Native Americans and Native American mascots as names. So it's like, there you have it right there. Like I tell my students, you're not going to always understand a community that you don't belong to. You're not always going to understand their perspective, but it's important that when that community is telling you the same thing over and over again, it's important that you believe that what they're saying is true, even if you can't quite wrap your head around it because you haven't lived in their lived experience. So we shouldn't be having this discussion still in 2023. We shouldn't still be talking about Native American mascots here. I don't like that the article, it's not the article's fault, but the article talked about certain areas having a process to work with local recognized tribes and work with them for approval. And I don't like that, because when I think about the Atlanta Braves, they're one of the professional teams that allegedly, supposedly has some kind of agreement with local Native peoples there to use the Braves and you see Atlanta Braves games, and very famously when they had their World Series run last season, Trump was there and they were doing their racist salute, and it's just clearly with racist intent, and it's just trash. And locally here in Los Angeles, our local Native peoples are not recognized federally. The Tongva folks do not have federal recognition. So I don't like this idea that you need to be like recognized by the government before being part of approval for Native. Let's just not have Native American mascots. Let's not have any mascots for any school or sports team based on actual people and an actual community, because it's unnecessary. There's all these animals we can name, sports teams after. There's all these ideas. There's just so much out there. There's a wide world of possibilities, folks. Wide world of possibilities.
Yeah. Such a wide world of possibilities. Nowadays, Manuel, we have mascots that are named after concepts. Okay, like the Miami Heat or the Orlando Magic. You don't even have to be like a physical object. You could be a feeling and be a mascot, right? And so you could be an element of the periodic table, like the Phoenix Mercury. Okay, like there's so many things that you could think of. It's just so revealing of the inner workings of the psyche of colonizer legacy America.
Yeah.
That like, of all the things you could think of, lions and tigers and bears and Mercury, you were like, how about the Red Raiders or whatever these other mascots are? And it's just flagrantly racist. And I agree with you about these clauses, right? And on the one hand, I know there's some controversy because there's examples like the Braves, like the Florida State Seminoles are probably the most, maybe the highest profile example of this, where, the tribe has officially endorsed it and also gets money from the university. There's some sort of licensing agreement or some financial arrangement at least in there, so they benefit from it. And I understand there's those are real factors. Also, I think these are just coercive relationships.
Absolutely,
way, right?
Hell yeah.
We colonize you. We so suppress you and try to destroy your lives and spirit and souls and culture and religion and means of economic sustainability. And then we're like, hey, how about we name this college mascot after you? And then we chant racistly with our chop about you. And then we'll throw some bucks to you that you need to feed your people and survive. Right. Does that sound like a good idea? This is wild. So it's shocking. It's so shocking to me that this remains an issue, and it just speaks so strongly about the extent to which we are unwilling. As collectively, this is not we as in you and me, but America, and especially the white and white adjacent and colonizer centric elements of America are committed to not recognizing the past in this country and to perpetuating symbols of that denial that sort of suggest that, like, not only should we continue to deny the past, but we should do so because there isn't even a past there that's like significant enough to talk about, right? So there, of course, there's no shame in these mascots. It's honoring people and it's showing respect and tradition and all this kind of stuff. Like it's so psychologically twisted and sick. It's almost hard to engage with in an honest intellectual discussion. So I'm glad that that this effort continues, that there's organizations out there like Illuminative that are continuing to fight this fight. And I know it's tough because people feel attached to their school and their mascot and want to fight to protect it. But like, this is crazy. It should have ended a long time ago, and it most certainly needs to end now, Manuel.
It definitely does. It definitely does. And I'll be honest, I don't know all the details about those teams who do have agreements with local Native folks, but it just sounds sketchy to me. And I could definitely say, like, as a black male, if there's some racist stuff happening out there and they're like, oh, wait, no, we spoke to your black leaders and they said it's okay. That don't mean nothing to me. So, just that don't mean nothing to me. So even if money's going back to a tribe, even if, there's some agreement, yeah, that's the agreement with the political leaders of those communities. That doesn't mean the people on the ground are with that. So yeah, no, forget that. We got all these other things to name mascots after. Let's get creative. Like, we don't have to name.
I just had a horrible vision, Manuel, of some high school out there that's called like the Coons or something crazy, and they're like, "Well, we met with Al Sharpton, and he said
it's
cool.
okay."
So,
and we're kicking back 10% to Candace Owens in support of
exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Oh man, that's terrible. That's so bad.
So bad.
We got work to do, folks.
We definitely do. We definitely do. And it's time for some healing, folks. It's time for some healing. And anybody that knows anything about ethnic studies knows that a big part of it, a big aspect of it, is healing. And we are so excited to have our guests in the building for this conversation about ethnic studies and expanding ethnic studies. This will be the first of several conversations. Actually, it's not even the first conversation. We've discussed ethnic studies on the show before. We'll drop some more links underneath this video. Of course, we had Roxana Duenas, an ethnic studies teacher extraordinaire, on our show more than once to discuss ethnic studies. So, ongoing conversation here. And this conversation for today is going to focus on the statewide graduation requirement and, exploring sort of the promise and the challenge of getting ready for that ethnic studies graduation requirement here in California. And definitely, it's not just for California educators. You definitely don't want to miss this conversation, because hopefully wherever you are working, wherever you are living, hopefully there's discussion about making sure we have quality ethnic studies for your young people in your state or your area. So seminar, ethnic studies, Theresa Montaño and Lupe Cardona coming up next. Stay tuned.
Hey folks, thanks so much for tuning in to All the Above. We really appreciate you. And as you know, All the Above is a small operation. It's just me and just Manuel, that's it. We have no sponsorships, which means we are totally dependent on our amazing audience to help support the show. So here's what you can do. Go to our website, which is aotashow.com/support. That's aotashow.com/support. There you can find links to everything you can do to support the show. You find all the links to every platform that we're on, where you can like, subscribe, follow. Make sure you share our show with your whole network. Also, you can donate there. We are on Venmo, we're on Cash App, and most importantly, you can find the link to our Anchor page where you can become a monthly patron. Even a small donation once a month will make a huge difference in helping us continue to produce the show. Lastly, you can find there the link to get your flyest, best, latest, All the Above show merch. Okay, all you gotta do is go to aotashow.com/support. Thanks, enjoy the rest of the show. All right, folks, thanks so much for joining us today for our seminar. And we have two incredible guests with us here today to talk about a topic that is deeply at the heart of what we talk about here on our show each and every week, and certainly at the heart of the educational career of both Manuel and myself. And that's to talk about ethnic studies and what's happening with ethnic studies, what's going well, and what the challenges are that we are working to overcome. And our two guests are going to help us dig into that today. We have Dr. Theresa Montaño and we have Lupe Cardona, both from Cal State University Northridge. Welcome, Theresa and Lupe, to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Now, folks, let me tell you a little bit more about our guests. Dr. Theresa Montaño has been for 15 years in Los Angeles and Denver a teacher. She's also been an active unionist, and Dr. Montaño has served on the California Teachers Association State Council and the staff of the United Teachers Los Angeles. Dr. Montaño has worked in higher education for over 2 decades, first as a faculty advisor for the UCLA Teacher Education Program, and since 2003, she has worked at Cal State Northridge, where she teaches courses on equity and diversity in schools, Chicano education, and is associate chair of the department. Dr. Montaño has published articles, research, and books on issues related to teacher preparation, bilingual education, union activism, and educating Latino and Latina and Chicana students. Currently, her activist scholarship includes critical race projects on women of color in educator unions and ethnic studies in K-12 schools. Dr. Montaño sits on the Cal State University Council on Ethnic Studies and is the council liaison to both the community colleges and the University of California Council on Ethnic Studies. She's a community representative on the LA Unified and UTLA Ethnic Studies Advisory Committee. And as a member of the California Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum Advisory Committee, she was an advisor on the original draft of California's Ethnic Studies Framework. Our second guest is Guadalupe Cardona. Lupe has been an ethnic studies, social studies, and theater educator for 23 years. She is dedicated to developing critical curriculum and culturally relevant activism to transform the world by fusing community cultural knowledge with a focus on autobiographical counter-narrative. Lupe is chair of the Association of Raza Educators in Los Angeles, co-founder of Sochi LA, member of Ethnic Studies Now Coalition, and founding member of the Liberated Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum Coalition. She earned a bachelor's in Chicanx and Latin American Studies from UCLA and a master's in Curriculum and Instruction, Language and Literacy from Arizona State University. She is now pursuing her doctorate in educational leadership at Cal State Northridge. Lupe has spent her life and career re-remembering herself and helps others on their quest to tell their own stories. Welcome, both of you, to All the Above. I'm going to kick it over to Manuel for our first question.
All right, we got ethnic studies dopeness in the building. Thank you both so much for taking time out to be here. We know you're incredibly busy as educators and activists and scholars, so thank you very much for taking time out to have this discussion with us about ethnic studies and the expansion of ethnic studies. And we'll start right here in California. So in late 2021, California took the groundbreaking step of being the first state to mandate that all high schoolers graduate having taken an ethnic studies course. So starting in 2025, every secondary school across California has to at least offer an ethnic studies course. And by the graduating class of 2030, each of those students needs to have completed an ethnic studies course in order to earn their high school diploma here in California. So let's start with, for the folks who are listening who are perhaps not super familiar, can y'all describe for us what ethnic studies is and why this move to mandate it at the high school level is so significant? And how about maybe we start with Dr. Montaño?
Absolutely. Ethnic studies is the interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary study that centers the voices, the experiences, and the stories of people of color in the United States, often those who have been neglected, marginalized, misrepresented, or often unseen in U.S. history books. It is not just about what goes on in books. It is a community-based curriculum which takes place not just inside the classroom, but outside the classroom. The hope and desire of ethnic studies is never to forget that ethnic studies rose from struggle. It was something that was initiated by students who were beginning to demand that they be seen in the curriculum. And so part of the curriculum is to transform and change society so that it improves society for every single person. It is decolonial, it is anti-racist, it is community responsive, it's intersectional, it's about solidarity, and it's about love.
Well, thank you so much for that. And how about it being a requirement now then at the high school level? Because yes, for folks who are familiar, we certainly pay respect to the Third World Liberation Front and the originators, the struggle that gave birth to ethnic studies, certainly in the higher education space, and having it now as a mandate in the K-12 space. Why is that important or significant?
Well, ethnic studies is a mandate or a requirement for every single student graduating from high school, from community college, from the CSU, and soon from the UC, is a mandate that requires students to learn about 4 particular disciplines: Asian American studies, Black studies, Chicanx, Latinx studies, and American Indian and Native studies. And it's not just, I said, it's not just a course. Ethnic studies changes lives. It gives students a purpose. I know it saved my life. It gave me direction when I was hopelessly lost about what I was going to do with my education. It increases test scores. It increases the number of students of color who enter the university. But most important, it improves the cross-cultural relationships of all our students. And it's time. It's time that we at least spend one course in our educational trajectory learning about the communities that helped build this nation that have been forgotten.
So much of what you said there resonates for me personally, Dr. Montaño, in my own experience with K-12 education. And this was definitely before, at least to my knowledge, where I grew up, before anyone was talking about ethnic studies outside of a university context. But feeling like exactly what you're describing was, in many cases, so missing from the core curriculum throughout my K-12 experience, and the pockets where I found it, just how engaging, empowering, and enriching for me personally, and developmentally important it was as I was trying to understand myself, my history, and my place in the world. So very much appreciate those comments. For our next question, you mentioned the mandate about ethnic studies, and for those around the country who are watching or listening might not realize the extent, especially in the larger landscape we're on now, the extent to which there is a coming mandate for ethnic studies from kindergarten through university in the state of California, and how certain districts like LA Unified have moved forward more quickly with instituting mandates. And would love to hear a little bit from you both about examples that you maybe can cite or can share a little bit about of kind of what is happening with ethnic studies currently in districts like LAUSD, and what the impact of that is that you're seeing. And also connected to that, if there's anything that perhaps the public might just not know or misunderstand about ethnic studies, that'd be helpful to share. And Lupe, how about we start with you?
Sure, I can share a little bit about that. I think something that's very important to recognize is what Theresa said earlier, and that is that this is a requirement that all was born from struggle. So I'm right now coming to one of the birthplaces of the 1968 walkout, which led to the Third World Liberation Front and other things that happened where people were demanding ethnic studies. But right here in Los Angeles Unified School District, it was the people themselves. It was the students, it was the teachers, it was families and community members who demanded that LA Unified School District pass a resolution to make ethnic studies a graduation requirement. And that kind of set a trend throughout the state of California, where people were really, if they don't push for a requirement, it's very unlikely that it will come to their school, or if it is in their school, it would be I guess you could say, in danger of being pushed out. School district, we have South, but we have been at the forefront of rolling out, ethnic studies in our classrooms, in our K through 12 classrooms. But we always need to remember that it is something that the community has asked for. It's something that the community has asked for since 2012, when it was one from.
I think it's important to, there are districts that are doing exceedingly well in implementing ethnic studies, right? That have made a concerted effort to make sure that the teachers who are teaching ethnic studies, if they do not have a degree or background in ethnic studies, are getting the professional development and guidance necessary to develop ethnic studies courses, right? Ethnic studies is not multiculturalism. It's not even culturally relevant pedagogy, though multiculturalism and culturally relevant pedagogy are important in the teaching and the pedagogical practice of ethnic studies. What we see in LA is we do believe that LA Unified will be rolling out a course for every graduating student in LA Unified. We've been working closely. They're one of the first school districts to develop a syllabus for the Intro to Ethnic Studies course that is quite rigorous, but allows teachers the flexibility to change those courses. We're working with them at the present time to develop a micro-credential for teachers who don't have the experience in ethnic studies. They may not every single teacher may be ready to roll out the course as authentic ethnic studies by next year, but LA Unified is going to be working to make sure that their teachers eventually develop the skills necessary to teach it right. And then there are districts that we know are not teaching ethnic studies. They are essentially taking multicultural courses and doing a food fiesta folklorico, embedding it into a U.S. history course, which really is not ethnic studies. That should have been done many years ago. Every single course should be culturally relevant, whether it's math or science or history. Ethnic studies is an umbrella of several disciplines, and it should be given disciplinary deference to those disciplines that comprise it.
Yeah, thank you for that, and I love that that phrasing of it as an umbrella of these many disciplines. And I think that's one part that for teachers, depending on the district, some districts, they're looking towards their social science teachers, folks with history backgrounds, such as myself, to teach ethnic studies, and other districts are looking at their English teachers. And it's very important to hammer home the multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary aspect of ethnic studies for sure. And in the midst of all that, we're also operating as educators at a time when there's this gigantic national organized attack on everything from critical race theory to even the mention of culturally responsive teaching at all. Of course, we're seeing book bans, we're seeing attacks on marginalized perspectives generally. And in terms of California, there's this misperception that California is just blue from the top to the bottom all the way through, and that we don't have those kind of attacks and that we don't have those kind of problems. But of course, in California, we see a lot of these right-wing attacks, and we have at least 2 or 3 school boards that have already voted to pass bans on so-called critical race theory. So we're wondering, in terms of ethnic studies and looking at this graduation requirement and looking at 2025 and 2030 as the big dates here, what are we seeing in California in terms of attacks or pushback against ethnic studies and expanding ethnic studies into every school across the state?
Well, we shouldn't be surprised that there is a pushback on ethnic studies. I think first and foremost, we have to recognize that ethnic studies rose from struggle because communities of color and Native communities in California did not see themselves present in the history books. It rose as a part of the civil rights movement, where communities of color, Black communities, Chicanx, Latinx communities were beginning to ask for changes, not just to the education system, but to the everyday life system of ending residential segregation, etc. So ethnic studies calls on society to look at what it's done wrong and to begin to move against those ills and improve society for communities of color, which will eventually improve society for everyone. So we shouldn't be surprised But in terms of California and the nation, we see different forms of pushback, and they're all very organized, very well financed. So you will see organizations pushing back against critical race theory, or basically equating critical race theory to ethnic studies. And we often say, I know a very few, unless they're really good social studies teachers now, because it's in the news and you're going to teach what's in current events, teaching critical race theory the way that I would teach it in a university. But we do discuss race, and that's what critical race theory says, that racism is endemic in the US, and that social justice must be a part of changing or transforming a system constructive on systemic racism. You're going to see some school districts like Placencia, Yorba Linda in California that have ruled critical race theory no more. The same with Paso Robles. In other districts, you're seeing pushback against the inclusion of Arab American studies, right? Of wanting to teach about solidarity with communities in the Middle East seeking self-determination. So you'll see that fight. In some communities, you'll see pushback against the Inlakesh, which is "you're my other me." It's kind of like the golden rule in Mayan culture. There'll be pushback against the Inlakesh because it's considered, quote unquote, sacrilegious or paganism, right? And yet again, in other districts, like places in Orange County, you see people asking teachers and librarians to remove any references to GLBT, right? Q, stories for children and for young people in schools. So really, and all of that is ethnic studies, but it also is not ethnic studies. All of those things are a part of ethnic studies. But again, it shouldn't surprise us. Whenever you work towards affecting change, you're going to be attacked. And while I see the attacks, I'm also feeling very positive about the fact that just this week alone, I was asked to visit 2 school districts that have been experiencing pushback because their parents are starting to organize to protect and defend the ethnic studies curriculum that they presently have. So again, change isn't easy. It's going to happen. California gets this pushback. I always say to my friends in Texas, well, we get it, but at least we ain't Texas, because we have some places in California that are at least getting it right.
Yeah. Very much appreciate that, Dr. Montaño. And I do just want to name for our audience, we're having a little bit of a technical glitch with one of our guests, Lupe Cardona. It looks like she may not be able to rejoin us today, but we're going to continue the discussion with Dr. Montaño and continue to talk deeply here about the future of ethnic studies. Dr. Montaño, a bit of a follow-up to what you were just saying. I have maintained, and not that, that anyone cares what I have to say about this issue, but I have maintained from the beginning that the strategy that I think has been adopted by this sort of liberal progressive establishment, both politically and in the media spaces, to push back against this anti-CRT kind of right-wing set of attacks is to say, well, critical race theory isn't being taught in K-12 schools, so this is a non-issue, or there's nothing to fear. My stance has been that was the wrong strategy. I understood why folks took that position. And of course, there's a technical truth to the fact that you're doing much more sophisticated graduate level work in your courses at CSUN than, a 5th grader is doing in their school. But my stance has been that actually there are kind of developmentally appropriate versions of critical race theory that are being taught, at least in responsible schools, and that's actually a really good thing. And our strategy should be to sort of stick our flag in the sand and say, no, critical race theory is a good thing. It helps us. It's healthy. It's positive for individuals and the collective, and to defend it. So I'm curious, with your experience as a higher ed practitioner who teaches.
Absolutely. I just finished about a year ago writing an article on, yes, critical race theory is taught in K-12 schools for the UCLA Law Review, because I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think taking the position that we don't teach it or that it's not a part of ethnic studies is a mistake, because at the center of critical race theory is the argument that racism is endemic to the US, and that I, as a mother of a son of color, a son who is queer, or a Black mother who opens her door in the morning and sends their children off to school, and that child, when he leaves the home, going into a mall, right, being racially profiled, being subjected to a greater chance of being in prison than going to graduate school, all of that is based on race. And so when someone enters the classroom, they don't leave their racialized experiences outside the door. So that as a teacher, if I'm teaching ethnic studies, I am centering those racialized experiences. I'm not teaching ethnic studies if I'm not. I can't talk about the contributions that people of color have made to the United States without talking about the tremendous hardships that those people of color have faced. I can't talk about Charles Drew and plasma without talking about his experiences when he went to hospitals. I can't talk about Cesar Chavez without talking about the experiences of farm workers based on race or immigration policy. So absolutely, it is a tremendous disservice to say we don't address issues of race and that we don't teach critical race theory in K-12 schools. If we're not, then we're not doing ethnic studies.
Yeah, I love that. And also, just myself as a educator in the Pasadena area, parents have asked me during open house, during back to school night about critical race theory. They see headlines and they hear about it in the news, and 10 out of 10 of them, 100 out of 100 of them are happy when I tell them that we absolutely use tenets of critical race theory as a tool within, not just within my ethnic studies classes, but within all my classes, my government and civics, economics class as well. And a lot of times that conversation about critical race theory, a lot of times the folks who attack it purposely, willfully, ignore the voices of communities of color generally, but also just whole swaths of our nation who know the importance of having these development of critical consciousness and being able to interrogate racism and the legacy of white supremacy in our country. So yeah, all that. And all that being said, we're looking at 2025. So what, a year and a half from now, before every high school across California has to be offering ethnic studies. And there aren't a whole lot of teachers who have the background and the training to interrogate race and racism and to do ethnic studies correctly. And of course, you mentioned micro-credentialing and other efforts to support teachers and get teachers prepared. But some wonder whether or not we will have enough prepared teachers for ethnic studies in time for this mandate. So the challenge of perhaps not having enough teachers ready right now to properly teach ethnic studies begs the question on whether or not poorly taught ethnic studies in certain areas of California is better than no ethnic studies at all. So we're wondering what your perspective is on this possible reality that ethnic studies won't be taught right in every school, not just yet.
Well, I do think it's a concern. I have to agree that it is a concern, and it's not necessarily anybody's fault, right? I mean, when you don't teach ethnic studies in a systemic way, then you're going to have teachers who graduate from universities without knowledge or foundation in ethnic studies. But that should not be the reason we do not teach it. I think we have to approach it in a way where we say, okay, we have a problem. Let's figure out a way how to remediate the issue. The fact that we have, and if you look at right now, the only thing that's required to teach an ethnic studies course in many school districts is the social studies credential. And I had some colleagues who actually took the social studies credential and looked at ethnic studies, right? At least how it's in the model curriculum and the 7 principles and how we define ethnic studies. and found that out of 167 learning outcomes in the social studies credential, 74 were focused on concepts other than people, everywhere from the principles to the rule of law to technology development, etc. And that the remaining 93 learning outcomes that truly focused on social science were mainly focused on the principles of American democracy, principles of economics, principles of geography. When you break that down, overwhelmingly, what was still being taught in a social studies credential or program were overwhelmingly European. 30 points on Europe, 49 points on European Americans, 22 points on Africa and African Americans, 12 points on Latin and Latino Americans, 23 points on Asian and Asian Americans. And that was mainly global, not US. So clearly a social studies credential is not enough to prepare a teacher to teach ethnic studies. So those of us in the university need to think about how best to prepare undergraduate students. You don't have anyone teaching math or science or chemistry without a BA or a background in that content area. We need the same in ethnic studies. You shouldn't be teaching ethnic studies if you just have a BA or a social studies credential. I love art. I am passionate about art. I am passionate about music. But just because I love it doesn't mean that I can teach it. And that's what we say about ethnic studies. Just because you love ethnic studies doesn't, everyone should take it, but not everyone should teach it. So what that means is it's not an excuse not to implement programs. It's a reason to really think about how do we develop an aggressive professional development program for those teachers currently in the districts that will be teaching ethnic studies. We're working with teams of teachers in Hayward, in Castro Valley, LA County next week to begin to work with teachers who don't have a background to play a quick catch up on how do I develop curriculum. But it takes hundreds of hours to do that. And the district has to be committed. So does the university, quite frankly. The university has to really take a look at what it's doing. It's not enough to have 1 year credential in ethnic studies without having a background, but maybe we should have a credential in ethnic studies. And we're working with Wendy Carrillo right now, who's actually thinking more and more about, let's enter a conversation with stakeholders in teacher education, in ethnic studies, in the K-12 community, administrators and teachers to begin to discuss what do we need to do to better prepare our ethnic studies teachers. So don't use it as an excuse not to implement ethnic studies. Use it as a reason to really begin to dig in and prepare our teachers and try to remediate what we have failed to do so far.
Yeah. Dr. Montaño, you're making me think that at least to an extent, we do have maybe an analogous subject in the K-12 curriculum that is also subject to potential intrusions of folks with different ideologies who may want to co-opt the curriculum in a way. And that's just science generally, right? That there is a perhaps smaller committed opposition than there is currently to ethnic studies, sadly, but a set of folks who are, who would prefer that the science classroom teach something more like religion or conservative interpretations of religion, to teach creationism as opposed to evolution and that sort of thing, and that there are at least a certain set of guardrails that the state and districts and curriculum publishers put up, which of course isn't a perfect system, but at least tries to set the sandbox within which teaching will take place to say the curriculum for biology is not creationism. It is, the inclusion of the theory of evolution. And we're not going to debate its legitimacy. We're going to talk about the scientific basis for it. But perhaps there's something analogous that we might do for ethnic studies. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that's important. And I also think it's important in terms of how it's going to be implemented in our community colleges and our CSUs. one thing that this has done is really given us an opportunity to get into ethnic studies in more depth and breadth than we ever have before, right? So for many, I mean, it's not a new discipline, but it's a relatively new discipline, right? It's 50 years old compared to hundreds of years for many other academic disciplines, right? And it's many separate disciplines under the umbrella of ethnic studies. Each of those disciplines has its own trajectory. And within each of those trajectories is the idea that each is defined by an academic area, right? By an academic organization, by academic, like math. Math is academia, and it's a math organization that defines what math is. Same with science. And that same thing is going to happen with ethnic studies. We're really beginning to look at what is ethnic studies and what isn't. We've never had a conversation like what makes multiculturalism and diversity, equity, inclusion different than ethnic studies. The implementation of that is forcing us to look at what is different and how every discipline should be about diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just ethnic studies. And I do think that there are going to be discussions, and part of the pushback is ethnic studies' stance on the demand that ethnic studies have deference to the experts within the content area. Part of it, I mean, remember when we first started this discussion and I was arguing with my colleagues in LA Unified who kept saying, ethnic studies is not the way you teach it in the university. And I kept saying, you don't say that about math. You don't say that about social studies. You don't say that about economics. You don't say that about any other discipline. Do not say that about ethnic studies. It would be a disservice to our students. It would be less academically rigorous. It would be creating a minuscule kind of program in ethnic studies for ethnic studies students if you did not define it according to what it is in the university. And that is going to be a discussion about perspective, a discussion about what's included in ethnic studies, what it is and what it isn't. So yeah, you're right. I think this is absolutely forcing us to begin to better define a 50-year-old multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary discipline.
Yeah. Well, we could talk about this forever here on the show. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of our segment today. So Dr. Theresa Montaño of Cal State University Northridge, thank you so much for joining us today. And also a special thanks to our second guest who was with us for a portion of time, but unfortunately the technology gods did not cooperate with us today. That was Lupe Cardona, a doctoral student at Cal State University Northridge as well. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us, and thank you for addressing this very important issue.
Absolutely. All right, folks, that's it for today's seminar. Thanks so much for joining us, but stick around. Next up is our class dismissed.
All right, folks, we have reached that time in the episode where we like to give shout outs and show some love to folks doing great things in the world of education. It's class dismissed. Jeff, what do we have for today?
Well, Manuel, today we got a large group shout out. There's so many people who are doing so much super dope work across the country. We can't just name one, but we want to give a collective shout out because this time of year, that like May, beginning of June, end of school year window of time is when there's probably the greatest concentration of really incredible performance assessment, authentic performance assessment taking place in schools all over the country. Now, authentic performance assessment might sound like a bit of a fancy technical term. You might know these really cool authentic performance assessments as things like the amazing end of year play, or the incredible arts night exhibition, for the art teachers' students, or the action research projects that kids are doing in their social studies class or their science class, and they are preparing research that they've been working on to present solutions to big problems in the community that they want to learn more about and advocate around, and could potentially lead to real change at their school site or in their community. And there's just so much of this great work happening all across the country that we want to give a shout out to the educators who are designing, refining, partnering with community members, bringing in, judges and observers from the community to give kids a real authentic audience, organizing parents to come in and celebrate their children's accomplishments. We want to give a shout out to the educators who are doing and leading all of that work, including, ladies and gentlemen, none other than my co-host here, Dr. Manuel Rustin, who just recently in his ethnic studies classes, as we talked about in a recent passing period episode, had his students doing very similar kind of work. So I want to say, we see you. Props to all you amazing educators out there doing this stuff. This is, in my humble opinion, the most impactful type of work that we do with students in schools. And so it's just beautiful to see. And so props to you all.
Yeah, you heard the man. Props to me, specifically me. Just kidding. But yeah, shout out to all those fascinating teachers out there. And we know a lot of you are AOTA family, so double shout out for being a dope educator and being a dope listener or viewer of our show. And with that in mind, reminder, underneath this video or underneath this episode and whatever podcast streaming app you're using, links to a whole bunch of stuff, including our stories, but also links to some more resources around ethnic studies and previous videos or previous episodes where we discussed ethnic studies. So definitely check that out. Certainly if you haven't recently, or if you don't remember if you've ever written a review for us or left a 5-star for us, definitely double check that and see if you can go ahead and do that. And if you listen to the show, hey, take a second, click on that little YouTube link to the YouTube version of the show and click a quick thumbs up, because that goes a long way into helping us reach the feeds of teachers and folks interested in teaching who are scanning YouTube for trying to find something that's dope that really reaches or focuses on marginalized communities. So your thumbs up and your YouTube subscription really goes a long way, even if that's not how you enjoy our show the best or the most often or whatever. All right, I think we're done here. I think I'm pretty tired here at the end of this episode. Shout out to all y'all for hanging out all the way to the end of this episode. We will see you next week. Remember, we love y'all. And now, I was going to say now it's time to get to class, but this is not a passing period. We'll catch y'all next week for a passing period. All right, y'all.
Slipping.